So, Steve, that Purdue game was basically the Buckeyes finishing off drives and taking advantage of Purdue not being on their A game with a few mistakes and taking what I thought was a ridiculous line. I was wrong, 21 points, and just obliterating it against a team that's not looked bad against anybody.
Yeah, it was quite a telling performance, I think, by Ohio State, and at least offensively, where the 2 weeks prior, Nebraska and Penn State, they had struggled in the red zone and only scored 2 offensive touchdowns in those games. They scored 59 points in this game. I think it was 8. Was it 8 offensive touchdowns, I guess? I don't know. But at any rate, a whole bunch of touchdowns, lots and lots of them. I know C.J. Stroud threw for 5, and Travion Henderson ran for 2, and Garrett Wilson ran for 1. So, yeah, it was it all adds up, 8 touchdowns. They scored touchdowns the first 6 times they had the ball, and it's hard to be any more efficient than that. Then they kicked a field goal the 7th time and then had a touchdown the 8th time they had the ball. So it was, in a sense, as good an offensive performance as you're going to see. And to me, they got off to a great start, which is what they had done. Obviously, when they played Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana, they had gotten out to a great start in those games. And now against Purdue, they did. They didn't get off to a great start against Penn State or Nebraska and kind of sputtered. And those games went all the way down to the wire before Ohio State was able to put them away. So to me, offense, give them an A- or an A+ for that game. Defense, there were a lot of issues, and it wasn't that they I think the last 2 weeks have illustrated some past defense problems for the Buckeyes. They gave up 2 big passes against Nebraska, one of them for a touchdown, the other one set up a touchdown. And then this past week, they gave up a lot of medium-sized chunk plays. I think the longest one was 27 or 29 yards for a touchdown, but there were several other 20-yard plays, and Purdue, with their outstanding pass offense, was able to sustain drives and convert in the red zone. So that had to be very troubling, I think, for Ohio State. I mean, the only positive thing you can say is, unlike Nebraska, they didn't give up the 50-yarder, but on the flip side, they still gave up a bunch of points and a bunch of yards, and that's not going to be acceptable as they get deeper into this. And you don't want to get into a shootout with Michigan State or Michigan, obviously, so and whoever else you might play after that. So I think there are some deep concerns. People, see, they scapegoat a lot of the players on defense who made mistakes. But as I looked at the snap count from the game, the coaches have pretty much spoken on who's going to play. Bryson Shaw played all 72 plays of that game at safety. So it's not a case where, one, the coaches believe they've got anybody better behind him that's even worth 10 or 15 plays. And two, he's won them over somehow. I don't know, that he's kind of been there on the business end for some past defense breakdowns here in the last 2 games in particular. And I don't like singling people out when they make mistakes like that. They're all college athletes and everything. But at the same time, if you want to win the Big Ten championship, get into the playoff, and get to the national championship game, you got to shore some things up. And so they're back to the drawing board as far as I'm concerned with pass defense this week.
Well, and Ryan Day did say all of the coach things about Bryson Shaw, that he gets them lined up well, that sort of thing. They also they dropped a bunch of 8 guys in coverage and would rush 3, and I wonder how much of that is because of the concern at safety. We know they've scrapped essentially the single high and gone with 2 high, and they ran some cover 2, and they've dropped some guys. How much of that is protecting Bryson Shaw? And people say get him off the field or whatever. There's nobody else at this point. Like Lathan Ransom was not the answer. The only other answer at this point is Cameron Martinez, Marcus Hooker, and obviously Bryson Shaw has a better understanding of where everybody needs to be, and he understands the defense. Now, sometimes he's not getting to where he needs to be, and he knows that. He said he's made mistakes. Others have as well. But at this point, you have to, I guess, not hide him, but understand that's what your defense now has. Try to figure out how to work around that, because he's going to be out there. And so, you know, whether that's dropping more in coverage and asking more of your defensive line. And this may have just been, I think this was also just a product of they're facing a team that's going to throw the ball 50 times. We are now up 28 points. Let's just keep everything in front of us. Don't get beat deep. Make them earn and drive and burn that clock as much as they can. And I think there is something to be said for not giving up big plays, but also they were dropping everybody. And so they were okay with giving up small plays, knowing that they're not going to be stopped. Like Ohio State's offense is not going to be stopped 4 times in a row and suddenly the game is tied. So I think Ryan Day had that confidence. I do wonder what would happen if they were to have been more aggressive against Purdue. I don't know if that would have made things better or made things worse.
Yeah, you can't change the engine on the plane once it's already taken off at this point. You know, they're going to have to ride with the pieces that they have, and that's what it's going to be. And whether or not you have to do some things to try and minimize exposure, that's what you kind of have to do. And as Steve had said, there weren't really any huge hits in terms of long plays. The long play, Milton Wright had a 29-yard reception. There were 5 guys that had 20-yard receptions. No run went longer than 11. So Ohio State really just tried to keep everything in front of it. So it was a little bit of a death by 1,000 paper cuts there. But, you know, when Ohio State puts up 59 points, that cures a lot of issues at that point. But, you know, it'll be, you know, not to get ahead of ourselves, but it'll be a different game against Michigan State. It'll be a different game against Michigan. It'll be different all the rest of the way because, honestly, Aiden O'Connell is a better quarterback in terms of just pure passing ability than anything Ohio State's going to see moving forward until potentially the playoffs. You know, I think Jeff Brom is probably a more gifted offensive play caller than anything that Ohio State's going to see moving until it gets to the playoffs. So, you know, you had to kind of ride with what was happening there, and it was frustrating for Ohio State fans to see the defense take a step back. And spoiler alert, people are going to get frustrated to see what happens against Michigan State, because I think Michigan State's going to put some points up and there's going to be some frustration there. But once again, I think Ohio State's going to be able to put up a lot of points in that game, and we're going to probably be sitting in the same situation a week from today talking about how Ohio State fantastic on offense and having, you know, some deficiencies on defense, and you know, how is this team ever going to survive Michigan the following week and then wash, rinse, repeat?